Welcome to A Conversation with History. I'm Harry Kreisler of the Institute of International Studies. Our guest today is Wendy Ewald, a photographer, writer, and educator. She travels the world teaching photography to children with the aim of empowering them to see more clearly and to tell their stories to the world. Her books include Appalachian Women, Three Generations, Portraits and Dreams, Photographs and Stories by Children of the Appalachians, Magic Eyes, Scenes from an Andean Childhood, and I Dreamed I Had a Girl in My Pocket, the story of an Indian village. Wendy, welcome to Berkeley.
Thanks.
What in your childhood pointed you in the direction of working with images?
Well, I was surrounded completely by images. The library in our house had pictures literally from the floor to ceiling on every wall. And my grandfather was, I guess he was sort of credited with sort of organizing advertising and beginning to use images in advertising rather than words.
Mm-hmm. And his name was?
H.G. Ewald.
I see.
And he started a company called Campbell Ewald. And I grew up in Detroit, and so really he had GM's account, and that was really the beginning of advertising, was really the car industry, a lot of it, as we know it. So we were photographed at every step of the way by all the, what are now, actually some of these photographers I've met, and written about, and Christmas cards and this and that. So it was certainly all over the place.
So there were both images everywhere, but then you were an image, is what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah, so we were on either side of the camera. And as each new technological, like I remember the Polaroid films came along, we got it before anyone else did. You know, we got a color television before anyone else did. So it was almost like you took cameras like a duck to water or something. Yeah. I mean, I never thought I'd be a photographer because then that was something else. But when I did, it was clear that's what I wanted to do, and I knew that from the time I was in high school. The first time I, made my pictures in the darkroom. That's what I wanted to do, and I never really looked back.
What about early mentors besides your grandfather? Any women in the family that were important in shaping the adventurous course your life took?
Well, I guess my grandmother was a very strong woman and sort of put my grandfather together and would travel, and there were exotic pictures of her on camels or in tents in China or something like that. So I mean that was there, but as far as none of the women in my family had ever worked, mm-hmm. So that was a jump.
And your grandmother's name was?
Was Olida Ewald.
Olida Ewald. What about books? Any books in particular influenced you in your younger days?
Well, I loved books, and I think I actually had a photography teacher in high school whose name was also Wendy McNeil, who was doing a book at the time that she was my teacher, and I would go over to her house and see her laying it out, and I was just thrilled by the idea that you could actually do this, and I really felt that this was something I had to do in some kind of way.
And was this in high school or?
Yeah.
High school.
Yeah. No, it was wonderful. I mean, she just happened to be starting her teaching career and was there, and then went on to teach in university. But where did you go to college? I went to Antioch.
And that would have been what years?
It was 1969 to 74.
So a turbulent time.
Yeah, it was a very, very interesting time. Actually, I was just hearing the other night from a classmate of mine that during that time the college was actually closed down for quite a bit of time. There were strikes and various things, and so politically we sort of grew up pretty quickly. And I was just learning that now it finally came out that the FBI was actually involved in a lot of those strikes, which I hadn't heard before. So,
how did that turbulence affect the values that you took to photography and mix with the values from your growing up years?
Well, I think I think what was really important to me was actually growing up in Detroit and seeing the turbulence going on, like the riots, and then the summer after the riots, I worked in a program for high school referrals. It was essentially a program to keep those kids who would riot off the streets, and so it wouldn't happen again. And it was wild that I was in this situation, because I was part of a team of teachers, almost all of them African American, who were real teachers, and I was 17 to teach a Black history course. And this was, 1968, and it was a time when Betty Chavez and a lot of people were around, and it was hard actually for me to go back to school after that, because that to me really seemed like the real world. So Antioch was sort of a reflection to me of what I'd seen outside.
And did you make the connection early with the camera here and this kind of social work?
When I worked in the Black History course, it was before I had started taking pictures, but I ended up being the visual reference person, and so I made all kinds of charts and things to put up that we could use, and I think that sort of led to an interest in using images.
And how did the images that you created impact this group that you were working with?
Well, I think it was a more direct way of talking about history, and it was because history can be a very dry thing, especially to these kids who probably hadn't had much experience with it, and to actually see people who were themselves, in a sense, in different times, I think helped get people excited about it.
Right. Are you a photographer, an educator, or both, or more than just those two things?
Well, I used to resist this question a lot.
Okay. You don't have to answer if you don't like it.
I never studied education. I took one education course in college and dropped out. And so I guess you could say that by training, I'm an artist or a photographer. And I think what I did really or do is, in a sense, use my practice as a photographer and artist as education.
For yourself?
No, with
others.
Yeah, with kids or with teachers or whatever. I mean, it's sort of like making. Sometimes I think of my work as like making models, and then putting those models out there for other people to use in the way that they choose to use them.
And what underlying values motivate you as you began to explore this work with photography, and then as that work in photography evolved?
Well, I think I was very interested in relationship with my subject, whatever that was. And I mean, I'm basically a fairly shy person and don't like the idea of intruding. And in the beginning anyway, it was a very comfortable way of giving the camera over, or at least sharing the camera with the people where I was. And then as time went on, it became more conscious, but because I realized that what was coming out of it was something that was much more complex and much closer to what it seemed the reality was.
Let's explain to the audience who may not be familiar with your work what process you have developed of collaboration with your subject.
Yeah, I mean, it started actually in 1969 when I worked on a Canadian Indian reservation, and this is right after I graduated from high school, and I devised a little. I was working basically as a social worker or a day camp counselor in this community, and I brought cameras and film with me because Polaroid gave me a grant, and I thought this would be an interesting thing to do. And so we had a little afternoon class where we go out shooting together, and then I eventually sort of got a little more organized about it and asked them to photograph their families and their community. And pretty quickly I saw that what they were photographing was was very startling and dealt with the issues of alcoholism and dwindling game and housing in a way that I'd never seen pictures made before.
So in the first instance, giving people camera and film helps them see the world around them.
Yeah.
You're empowering them.
Yeah. I mean, there are two things. I mean, in that situation, there were a lot of issues that they wanted to deal with, the problems.
And these were children or adults?
These were children.
For children,
yeah, like ages 9 to 12, something like that. And the other instance, a lot of kids that I work with at the beginning say there is nothing here to photograph. Maybe we'll go on a trip and then I can take the camera. So it's a process of them realizing that there are things in their own lives that are worth photographing. So it kind of gives them, they notice things that maybe they wouldn't notice, but it also reaffirms their own lives in a way.
So both of those two things, seeing and reaffirming their lives. You said yesterday at a talk on the campus that you like the democracy of the camera, if I'm quoting you correctly.
Yeah.
What did you mean?
Well, a camera is, to use a camera, you don't need the hand-eye coordination you need in painting or drawing. So for kids, it's something they can learn to use, or for any of us, pretty quickly. And it's also something, at least in the Western world, that we have some experience with, or that has a place in our lives already. And for a lot of the kids I work with, have not been very successful in school. And this is something that they can learn to do, and learn to do very well, and use as a tool for expression.
You also said you get excited about the excitement of others for photography. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's wonderful part of the work I do, because it's like I'm learning how to do it for the first time all over again. But children, adults that I've worked with, many, especially the adults, say, well, I'm no good at this. And to see them go through the process of using a camera and knowing, really becoming in command of that machine, and seeing the results, they feel a sense of real accomplishment and self-confidence and just excitement over what's possible.
And when you look at their photographs, do you see things that you didn't see?
Oh, yeah. Yes, all the time. I mean, for one thing, I really think that we all have a sense of composition from, when we're little, and it sort of gets shaped and changed by, maybe images that we see. But especially kids, and in kids in rural areas where I work a lot, their sense of composition has really been formed by their environment. And the way that they use a camera is very inventive, and I wouldn't have thought to use it that way. But then there are also things that they photograph that I couldn't see, or I never could make. I mean, it's like really being a fly on a wall in a way for me. I mean, I always feel like I'm being brought gifts when I see these pictures.
So it's a mutual, reciprocal education process in a way. The students are learning to see in part and to appreciate their lives, and you're learning about them.
Mm-hmm. And I'm learning about photography and images, and how people use images, and so many things. You
said earlier that you were shy, so in a way the camera becomes a tool for both of you.
Yes.
So it's enabling you to see environments and to relate to environments that you might not have been able to do before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and for the kids, the camera gives them a certain power that they wouldn't have normally as well.
Tell us how you teach them to use the camera when you go into these places. I should say that you've gone all over the world, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But Tell us a little about the process.
Well, one of the first things I do is just look at pictures with kids to see what they see, because we all see different things when we look at a picture, and for some kids who don't have any familiarity with pictures, actually to see what's in a picture can be difficult. But then eventually, when I give them cameras, it's a very slow process of learning how to use the camera and learning everything about that camera and how photography works and how light works, and what I want them to do is to be in control of that process, and so it doesn't seem like, today I can get a good picture, but so that they know what's going on. So it takes quite a bit of time, and I tell them they have to stand very still and they can't breathe, and I'm very dogmatic about it. And then, of course, they rebel against all that stuff. But in the beginning, I'm very strict, and then it's a process of sort of loosening up from there. And I give them assignments once they're comfortable with the camera to go home and photograph, and then they bring back the pictures or film, or depending on the process we're using, and then develop and print.
So they actually produce the product beyond just taking the picture.
Yeah.
They develop it. And is there a kind of an awe and wonder that you see as they learn this and so on?
Oh, yeah. It's very exciting. And I mean, even there are some very difficult parts of it, like learning how to roll the film on the reels, but they're able to do that. I mean, they really stick with it because they're very few kids don't learn how to do it. I mean, they're very determined. And
in one of the Appalachian books, in the introduction, I believe you said that you were given a group of kids and told that they were the slowest and would be the hardest to work with. What happened? Did that prove to be true?
No, that was amazing because that was definitely the best class of kids that I ever had. And there were some kids in there that were incredibly talented from the beginning. And there was obviously something in the visual that really turned them on, or wasn't being tapped in their regular schoolwork. But I worked with those kids for 4 or 5 years, and they just made amazing pictures.
And is it your hope that these kids will learn, besides learning the camera, photography, and helping to see, that they will link it to the stories of their lives and their families' lives?
You mean beyond what we do together?
Yes, right.
It's my hope, but in a lot of the places I work, their lives are pretty bound by the situation, by the culture and the economic situation, and so I try not to have too many expectations about whether they're going to keep making pictures in some way or another. What I hope happens is that it's a key to a creative process that they may use in other ways, or problem solving that they may use in other ways. In fact, some of the kids do go on to do that, but.
So it's not so much they're becoming a photographer
Right.
as having learned a set of skills that they can apply elsewhere. How does the camera affect their relations with their parents? Some of these places you go to are pretty rural, pretty underdeveloped, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, it's very different in different situations. In Appalachia, for example, the parents were pretty thrilled about it and proud and very helpful. In India, for example, it was a little bit difficult in the beginning because the parents didn't understand why I wasn't working with them and not the children, and didn't think it was going to work out. And then once the children began making pictures, they still sort of wanted to control it. And then when I suggested that the kids could make pictures of people when they weren't looking at the camera, that was a little dicey because they weren't sure whether that was actually making fun of them. But I mean, after a month of this, things calmed down, and they realized they had to do what the kid said, because the kid had the camera and they were going to decide. So it sort of turns the table.
What has surprised you most about the relation of the kids to photography?
I guess what surprises me most is that they're really great photographers. And it continues to surprise me. Every time I do a project, I think, well, this isn't working, this isn't, these kids maybe aren't that talented, or I'm not connecting. And if I just stick with it, and I look at the images enough, and I start seeing what they see, and then there is some incredible pictures there, and it happens. You could give me any group of kids anywhere, and that would happen, which leads me to think a lot about photography, and who's a photographer, who's not a photographer, and these categories that we make of who can speak and who can't.
Are there common themes that you see in the children's pictures, whether they're in Appalachia or India, Morocco, or wherever?
Well, yes. I mean, part of that is me. I'm there in all those places, although I try to be open as much. But, I mean, to start off, I ask them to do similar things, like photograph their families or their community, and try to ask them to photograph their dreams or fantasies. But and when they do make fantasy pictures, most of them tend to be pretty violent. That's similar. And most kids, except for in the Arab world, really like to photograph their family most of all.
Are these pictures very much shaped by their social reality?
Yeah, I think they are. I think the compositions are different. The way the camera's used are different. What they choose to photograph is different. In South Africa, for example, the portraits that the kids made were amazing. They had a sense of the body that the kids that I worked with in Chiapas, for example, just didn't have. But the kids in Chiapas made amazing fantasy pictures, very complicated and free. So in different places, different things emerge.
You have said that the camera is an educational tool for you, and it seems that it is the camera and the process you've just discussed is a way for you to adapt to and learn about the very different environments you've gone to. It's obvious in what we've discussed, but you've been in Appalachia, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Colombia, South Africa, India, Mexico, and probably others. Tell us about that, how you go to these places. Do you research them before you go there, or is your research your work?
Yeah, well, I always think that I should figure out what I'm going to do before I go, and I make a stab at it. I studied Arabic, I studied Hindi, and that's what language interests me, and the sort of the concept of language does. And then I try to read my books. I get all my books, but I can't really. It really doesn't mean anything to me until I'm there, and I've sort of accepted that my work is really my research, and I really don't want to have preconceived notions. Of course, we all have preconceived notions, but I don't want to reinforce those or tweak them until I'm there and can have my own experience and have the experience with the kids, have the kids tell me what's going on. So a lot of it is just sitting and looking, and it's very uncomfortable, and I don't understand what's going on, and despair, and about 3/4 of the way through I think, oh yeah, I get this is fun, this is great, I understand, and then it's almost over.
Are you surprised that such a shy person should be doing this?
Yes.
So the camera has empowered you in the process.
No, absolutely. I mean, as a kid I was so shy I couldn't walk down the street and ask for a glass of water.
Well, how do you choose these very different places, or are the choices differently determined?
Well, in the beginning, I sort of made the choices more consciously of places I was interested in, or India, for example. I really wanted to see how I'd seen pictures of India that I thought were amazing and very complex and visually complex, and I wanted to see how a child in that environment would use a camera. And then in Mexico, for example, the Polaroid wanted to send somebody to Mexico for the 500th anniversary of Columbus to do a project, and I said, well, sure, I'll go. And that was ironic because I chose to work in Chiapas.
Oh, gee, before the rebellion.
Yeah, and because I've worked in Chiapas, now Polaroid does not want any of those photographs to be shown in Mexico. Polaroid Mexico. It became a political thing, but it was wonderful to be able to go and do that.
So you got to choose where you went in Mexico.
Yeah.
Why did you choose Chiapas?
Because there was a Mayan writers cooperative that was doing a literacy, a Tzotzil literacy project, and I, thought that would be a very interesting connection to make, and also I was interested in looking at Mayan and non-Mayan kids, and
this is common that when you go someplace or in the process of choosing, you're working with an organization on the ground.
Yes, yeah, that's a given. I mean, that's how I really start, is to find, once interested in some place, to find an organization that has similar goals, or that what I do can help them in some way, and we can set something up.
Is it your hope that something will endure after you've gone, either benefiting the organization or the integration of photography into their work?
Yes, yeah, and it's so I bring the equipment in with me. I train somebody, and we talk about that from the beginning. And in Chiapas, I was just able to. Actually, for the Whitney Biennial, they used one of the kids' pictures in the portfolio representing the biennial, so I was able to send them money back so they could upgrade. And so that's also another thing that's sort of interesting, is to try and get to sell the pictures so that then money can go back, so that their programs can actually grow.
Sounds like this work in the 60s influenced you, both Antioch and the teaching of Black history at an early time in the movement there. Many of the places you've gone to are situations of poverty and underdevelopment. What is the reason for that?
Well, I never think about it that way, and I always think about that I'm going to work in a rural area, and it happens that rural areas don't have as many resources. And because I'm interested in working with kids who, for them it's the first experience or a new experience.
Your most recent book is I Dreamed I Had a Girl in My Pocket, stories and photographs by the children of Vishya, India, photographs by you and the children. Tell us a little about that project. What was the organization you worked with?
Right. Well, I worked with the Self-Employed Women's Association, which is a union of home-based workers. It has 50,000 members in that area alone, and there's rag pickers, cigarette rollers, and they've managed to organize these women and cut out the middlemen, and it's a very powerful union that has had members of parliament, etc. And they also have a video project using video to organize. And so I got in touch with them and asked them if they were interested in helping me or working with me. And and then they chose a village for me to work in. And they were actually really good because I said I wanted to work in a village. I didn't want to work in a town. All kinds of experts told me it wouldn't be possible to work with rural kids in India, that they didn't have enough connection to technology so that they just wouldn't be able to do it. And I just, kept saying, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to do. And they said, okay, we will help you, but no one else really would.
And so they found you a family to live with, or did you stay with one of them? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I also hired their translator to work with me, and so the two of us found a house to live in,
and they helped you, and you brought the resources to actually build a photo lab?
Right, yep, and the enlarger and cameras, et cetera.
And that became was integrated into the culture. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, well, it was since those there were no photographs in the village, and so this was the first time that that anybody had any pictures, but also they really didn't have a concept of how photographs were made, and really had the idea that if you imagine something, it would come out of the camera, and so.
This is the children now.
This is the children. Well,
right?
I'm sure that the adults would have been similar because they just didn't have any connection with it at all, so it became a very popular activity then for the kids to photograph and to see the pictures. So after cow milking time. Everybody would sort of come by this black house, as they called it, to see what had come out of it that day. And
you're talking about adults and children?
Yeah,
yes.
The whole place. Yeah, sometimes we'd be in there working, and they'd be pounding on the door, wanting to come in and see what was going on.
Fascinating. So you meet the class. You've arrived. You're there. How did you select the kids? Do you work with the school?
Well, it's different in different cases. In India, it was decided that it would be good to work with non-school-going kids as well as school-going kids because a lot of the kids don't go to school. And so we set it up outside of that, and actually I had the class outside of the dark room, or in the dark room when we could. And but in order to select the children, I worked with the village headmen to devise a system that would be fair and also to inform the parents. And so we first of all had a big parents meeting and explained it to the parents, and then the next meeting was for the children, and we had a line of, 50 kids snaking through the village, wanting to be part of it. So they suggested that I give them an exam. And so I asked them what they wanted to photograph, why they wanted to take pictures, and to look through a camera and tell me what they could see. And then based on this, we sort of I made some decisions, but the kids who really wanted to be in it were in it anyway.
And how many kids did you work with in the end?
Well, I think we chose 20, but there was probably 30 coming and going. So,
and it was across a caste lines. You're right.
Yeah, we tried to do that consciously. Actually, there were no Brahmins, or the high class, and then finally the mayor, the Sarpanch, said that there should be some Brahmins, and he wanted his son in there. So we did go the whole spectrum.
So at some moment in this process, you move from being a threat to almost a privilege. Is that right?
Well,
or were you never a threat?
Well, I think I was a curiosity.
A curiosity, okay.
And especially the things that I brought in with me. I mean, I like just to sleep with. There are only those string beds, and so I actually brought a sleeping bag to sleep in, and everybody had to come in and get in the sleeping bag. So it was like
the students of the village.
The adults, everybody.
I see.
And so every evening there was sort of everybody was hanging out, wanting to talk. So it was an entertainment, a lot of it.
Now, in the course of this project, you wind up interviewing many of the kids. The book collects some of those interviews, some of their pictures, and your pictures. Tell us a little about that process of interviewing the kids. Is it hard to get the stories out of them?
Right. Well, it was at the end. I mean, I knew those kids really, really well. And, of course, there was always the language barrier. I mean, I worked with a translator, and I did understand some, but I was asking the questions in English, and then the translator was asking them in Gujarati, and so a lot of it was kind of blind. But what I was interested in is all I had to do was ask the question, who is in your family? And got amazing stories of a lot of murders of women. And that's the only question I asked. I wasn't, they were very general leading questions, but a lot came out of it.
Part of your visit, we're doing a chat, and the kids who will chat with you on the internet read selections from the book, and it was striking, and they were very much impressed by racism, sexism. The one young kid even said, that people are really property and so on. It's quite a catalog of things that, at least in our country, we've moved beyond. Was it shocking for you, or have you developed?
It was shocking for me, but it wasn't only shocking for me. It was shocking for the people I was working with. It was shocking to Indians.
Really? What? I mean, why? I mean, but they weren't from outside the community, the Indians you were working with, or were they?
Well, they were in and out, but the organization was in the city.
Right. Okay. All right.
And then they were working within the village, with people in the village. But very little in India, very little is known about rural life. I mean, except for people who still have family there. But it's really two worlds. And actually, I've found that in many places I've worked. So that a lot of the work I've done has been shocking to people in the countries that I've worked in.
So in a way, you're the product that you're creating not only affects your preconceptions or conceptions of what the place is like, but you're really saying the urban areas or the educated people in the very same country.
Yeah. I did a show in Bogota, in Colombia, of work I'd done in the village there, and
that's probably associated with this other book, Magic Eyes: Scenes from an Andean Childhood.
Right, and it was hugely popular. I mean, it was written about all over, and there was a television program made on the project. And the day after it was aired, the secret police actually came to arrest me in the village. And so, I mean, I wasn't there, fortunately, and it was fine. But it was something. It was a thorn in somebody's side, and it was a look at a world that at least the upper classes had not seen.
Any recollections of these young Indian children that you'd like to recall now to give us a sense of your wonder in dealing with them as they learned about the camera?
Well, there's so many things. It was very difficult, actually, in the beginning for some of the kids who were untouchables and who hadn't been to school. This whole notion of learning something new in this way was pretty foreign, and some of the kids said, two of the boys said that they were not worthy, they were untouchables and not worthy of taking the cameras, and the first time I had them actually shaking with the camera in their hand, and then to within a week or 2 weeks being very commanding with the camera and getting people to pose, and but that transformation to me was amazing in India.
How do you think these kids are changed by what they've learned from you or what they've learned from themselves using a camera?
Well, I mean, I hope what it is, and I at least see it on the short term, is a sense of self-confidence, or being able to do this skill that both affirms who they are, but also that they're seen in the community with a certain amount of respect and power, which, being an old revolutionary, I really love that, seeing the parents, sort of look at the kids in a different way, or adults.
But you're very light in your touch when it comes to imposing your values on these kids. It's really, I hear you saying, the educational process that you've developed in which the camera is an important tool.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, they've got to decide how they're going to use that. The culture's got to decide how it's going to use that. And, I mean, otherwise the work is, well, it's not that interesting to me for one thing, and it's a process that just could get repeated over and over and over again, and I really get fearful of just doing the same thing over and over and over again, and I constantly think about that, how to do this differently, or how to do this in a way that the culture can speak to me and do it in a way that makes sense in that particular place.
Yeah, with the Indian children, another theme that emerged was the hold of religion and myths on their consciousness. Tell us a little about that.
Well, that was something I started thinking about because, I mean, I had to go back to the beginning because these kids or these people didn't know what a photograph was and really think about what is a photograph and what happens when you look at something or you point a camera at something. And it became clear to me that for them and perhaps for all of us at one point, making an image of something was a way of showing respect to that thing or that person, and for them that was very strong. And then through the process of it, there kept being references to religion. When they were developing their film, they would squat with the tanks in the darkroom and rotate the canister while singing prayers in the same way they would moving the candle around when they were praying. And then they had we had a light bulb that we'd painted red for our safe light in our darkroom, and they called that God's bulb because in a puja or a religious setup, they would have had a red bulb. So they kept relating the process to religion. And
there was a split among the students and the non-students about who thought they could capture their dreams. Do I recall that correctly?
Yeah. I mean, I tend to work with the school-going and the non-school-going differently. I mean, in different times, just because the school-going were in school and so I, first of all, talked to them about their dreams, asked them to tell me their dreams. I told them my dreams, and the school-going kids had lots of stories, etc. And whereas the non-school-going kids had very little to say about it. And then I sort of got into, well, okay, let's talk about things we might imagine. And don't you imagine that that you're such and such a film star and it really wasn't getting very far with that. I mean, they kept just saying, no. And so finally one of the girls said, listen, maybe you conned other kids in other situations, but you're not going to con us. And they really didn't want to do it, which led me to think about why, the difference between those groups. At first I didn't realize, that it was the two groups. And that the idea that these kids knew what their lives were the non-school-going kids knew what their lives were going to be like. There was going to be very little change. They were probably doing now what they were going to do for the rest of their lives, cook or go to the fields or whatever.
How does this experience change you?
Oh, well, it always changes me tremendously. I mean, it's hard to say what that change is, but I mean, I figure that's really what my job is to be changed by it in a sense, because I really feel like I can't see what they're doing unless I'm changed by the experience. And there's a certain amount of just sitting and looking and feeling that I have to do before I can start seeing what's going on, at which point something has changed, and I'm sure it's different in different places. But it's like beginning to see differently, really.
And understanding a culture, I get a sense that you really are embedded in it in a way that's quite
well, I try.
different.
I mean, it's it's difficult in a place like India. There's only a certain distance I can go.
A couple of final questions. What's impressed you most about the survival skills of young people that you've worked with in some of these very dire situations?
Well, I'm just always amazed by how positive most of the kids all the kids I work with are. How resilient and creative. And for example, in South Africa, working with kids in Soweto, and I also worked with Afrikaner kids. And the Afrikaner kids were amazed that I was working with kids in Soweto, and I would go back to the kids in Soweto and say, you know, this is what these kids said, and they were very racist, the Afrikaner kids, very isolated, and I just wanted to see how, what the kids in Soweto would have to say, and amazingly open, understanding, and said, look, these kids don't know any better, this is what they've been taught, this is going to have to change, but you can't blame them.
This is a Soweto kid.
Yeah, so, yeah. It was just the amount of forgiveness and understanding was incredible, and I found that in kids over and over again, their understanding and of very complicated situations is sometimes much greater than adults.
What has photography taught you?
Well, I guess it's like a passport. I mean, it's taught me that I can go into a situation I don't know anything about. Look around, build some images in my mind, understand the world in a different way from every encounter, kind of like being able to put some pieces together. And I guess that's kind of what drives me, always wanting to know, well, what does this piece out here mean to the rest of what I know?
It sounds like I hear that young girl in Detroit being photographed and seeing all these images, and she certainly developed as an adult woman a strategy for striking back in a way.
Right.
One final question. What would you tell students starting out now who want to use photography and not compromise their values?
Well, I think the most important thing is just to keep open and not to think that you have to do photography in one way or another or whatever it is that you're doing, but to be flexible in the situation and think about what it is you want to learn or what you want to know and how can you use the medium in that way. Because when I started out, there were people went to graduate school, they taught, they were very, and if I had followed those things, which I always thought I should, I would never have really gotten to do what I wanted to do.
Wendy, thank you very much for giving us these books, creating them for us, and thank you for coming to Berkeley and sharing your life story with us.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
And thank you very much for joining us for this conversation with history.